Hola, soy Hanna Fernández, divulgadora especializada en bienestar y descanso y autora del libro Aprende a descansar. Quiero darte la bienvenida a un nuevo episodio de mi programa de podcast A Guide to Live Well, una guía práctica de bienestar en la que descubrirás de la mano de los mayores expertos cómo cuidar tu salud y tu entorno para vivir más y vivir mejor. Welcome to the fascinating science of neuroplasticity, the brain's remarkable ability to rewrite itself and adapt throughout our lives. Today, we are going to translate complex neuroscience into practical strategies that empower us to break free from negative patterns, reshape our habits, and ultimately create the lives we aspire to lead. I'm thrilled to introduce today's guest, Nicole Vignola, an accomplished neuroscientist and the author of the book Rewire, Break the Cycle, Alter Your Thoughts, and Create Lasting Change. Nicole challenges the notion that we are just wired this way by offering tools and insights that show how we can take control of our mental health, overcome self-sabotage, and embrace growth at any stage in life. Whether it's learning to combat stress, supercharge your sleep, or rewrite deeply ingrained narratives, here you have a roadmap for unlocking your brain's full potential. So, if you have ever felt wired and tired, stuck in a bad habit, or just curious about the science of self-improvement and how to rewire your brain to achieve peak mental well-being, you are in for a fascinating conversation. Change your mind to change your life. Nicole, it's an honor to have you here. Welcome to my show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's truly an honor for me as well.
So, the title of your book, Rewire, is for me is evocative because it makes me think of the phrase wired and tired, which I'm sure that resonates with so many people. How do you, as a neuroscientist and also as a human being, address this modern dilemma between being constantly on and at the same time being mentally and emotionally exhausted?
I feel that. I actually felt very emotional last night, so I'm going through some of my own things at the moment. And I always say, you can't listen to your own head after 7:00 at night. Sit with the emotions, allow them, feel them, but we shouldn't attach ourselves to any importance at that time of the evening. I always say sort of sleep on it. When you wake up, then decide whether that statement that you're saying to yourself is true. And the wired and tired is an interesting one because one of our biggest teachings is that you want a central nervous system that is so malleable that you can feel stress and then feel calm and be able to translate between the two effectively. And what that means is that if you're feeling maybe lazy, that you know that you can get yourself into a state of motivation and go for a run. Or if you feel stressed from work, that you can then regulate into a state of calm. And that, to me, is a sign of a very malleable central nervous system that can work effectively in both states. Because we're always talking about stress reduction, but we don't talk about getting ourselves motivated as well.
Yeah, sure. Regarding stress, anxiety, and being exhausted, let's talk about dopamine. You talk about dopamine in the book. First of all, what is dopamine and why do we need it? Because it is not the enemy, it's the same as cortisol. We need dopamine to live. But what is it and why is it so important?
Yes, so dopamine's gathered some popularity over the years, and it's because dopamine is responsible for putting us in pursuit of a reward. So it's responsible for motivation and drive. And essentially what that means is that we can be in a state of motivation to attain rewards. And often what that means is that we grab our phones instead of, pursuing the long-term goal. And the problem with this is that there's no morals on dopamine, but what tends to happen is if you reach for dopamine that is quote unquote easy, like scrolling, sugar, alcohol, cigarettes, etc., what happens is dopamine spikes very quickly, but then it drops very quickly as well. And what you want is more of a sustainable dopamine increase from something that requires effort, such as going for a walk or going to the gym or cooking the dinner instead of ordering out and making that kind of tough decision to delay that gratification.
So we can talk about like easy dopamine, as you said, and the real dopamine. I remember a publication, a post you did on social media recently, talking about real dopamine and how to get it, being exposed to sunlight, lifting weights, having good sleep, dancing, even dancing. So we have like
Yes.
two different kind of sources of dopamine, like the easy one, not so healthy, and the real healthy one, right?
Yes. So let me clarify that
Mm-hmm.
that was mostly a metaphor in the sense that all dopamine is real, and both dopamines being released in both circumstances are the same. It's just that the way that the brain metabolizes that dopamine and the effects of how it's released and how quickly it is released differ depending on the context. So even though I wrote real dopamine, it was a metaphor for chasing things that are more real in life, because it's so easy to get caught up in that, the World Wide Web and social media. And, I think social media is a wonderful tool. I try my best not to, talk too negatively about it, because I want people to see the positive sides of it and then change their relationship with it.
Mm-hmm.
When we're constantly barraging about how bad social media is, which it is, it doesn't change the behavior. It just keeps us stuck in a loop of shame. So essentially, going for things that require more effort, like sunlight, dancing, running, etc., will just nurture a more long-term relationship with this delayed gratification.
Regarding social media, I always say that, well, technology in general, it is not bad itself. The problem is, or the bad thing is the use we do, or the non-controlled use we do of technology and social media. Because I'm talking to you thanks to technology. I know you thanks to social media. So the problem is how we use it.
Exactly. And, anything can be a good tool and anything can be a bad tool. I mean, not anything, but most things.
Yeah, mainly anything. Yeah. Well, in the book, you talk a lot about neuroplasticity, this ability of the brain. And for the people listening to us and who are unfamiliar with neuroplasticity, could you briefly explain what is it and why it is such a useful tool for personal growth?
Yes. So neuroplasticity is the ability for our brains to change. So I'll break it down into this. I'll break it down into the simplest forms. So in your brain, you've got these neurons. These neurons have these little branches that come off of them called synapses. And over time, these synapses connect with one another to create a particular pathway. Now, that pathway could ingrain for different habits, different behaviors, maybe self-beliefs as well. And generally speaking, you develop these pathways based on your childhood and in adulthood as well. But we do get a lot of our programming, if you will, from our formative years. So we watch our parents interact through the world, and then we adopt patterns. Then we go into the world and we either strengthen the patterns or create new ones. And so we have these ingrained pathways, and over time, these habits and behaviors, they become automatic. So we call it automaticity. You do it without thinking. And that is why a lot of people will wake up on a Monday and they will say, I want to change this habit this week. And then by Friday, they've forgotten. Because your brain is not going to remind you to try and make changes. It's going to take the path that is easiest, because there's no morals in the brain. It just knows what's been repeated. And the great thing about neuroplasticity is that we know that we can change the wiring of these synapses, so we can divert them into something new. And it requires effort, it requires time, consistency, patience, but we can. And the great thing is that we can do it at any age. So we've seen neuroplasticity well into old age, and is actually being used as a therapeutic intervention for dementia patients. So anyone that's maybe in their 50s, 60s, 70s and is thinking, oh, it's too late, it is absolutely not too late. It's just maybe a little bit more, a bit more effort required.
Talking about these things that we do automatically, is this the reason why it is very good for our brains to do things that are not so automatic? I mean, for example, I work with my computer every single day, like 8 hours, 10 hours. So for me, it would be a good idea to, learn to play an instrument, a musical instrument, or to learn a different language, things that I do not do normally, right?
Yes, that is correct. Exactly. So I actually started learning guitar about a year and 3 months. And I loved it. Yeah. And, I'm 33. I'm not old, but previously we used to believe that, we stopped changing at the age of 25. So I wanted to kind of challenge that status quo and become pretty good, actually.
Yeah, because age is one of the things regarding the brain that I don't know if you have this impression, but I think that there are like a lot of misconception about the brain's ability to change as we age. It's like, 35, 40, you are starting, like the I don't know, how do you say it in English? Like if you have this record, you have the side A and the side B. And in Spanish, we say that starting at 40, you start like the side B of your life. So your brain is not going to be better anymore. Your body is not going to be better anymore. And this is not true, right?
I kind of like that. No, it's not true. It's not true. But maybe metaphorically in other ways it is. But, it's great because we can change. Now, just one thing to note. I know that many of your listeners are women. There is a temporary cognitive decline during those years of switching from premenopausal into menopausal. But we know that those changes are not long-term. So the gray matter volume may temporarily shrink, and it's the reason why, there's brain fog and there's a lot of changes in the women's brain, but it does stabilize itself again after. So anyone that's sort of trying to make changes during these periods of their life, it could pose with a few more challenges, but it's not forever.
And is it possible, maybe not to stop, but maybe slow down the aging of the brain aging? Is it possible in some way?
Yes, exactly. So we slow down brain aging by remaining active throughout life, both cognitively and physically. So continuing to learn new things all of the time, continuing to stay physically active. So when we exercise, we release neurotrophins. What that means is they're little molecules that help the synapses remain strong, for lack of a better term. So BDNF is one of them, for example. And I'm only saying these words in case anyone wants to look them up. But it is released during aerobic exercise. So when you are working at around 60% of your heart rate maximum. So that could be a brisk walk or maybe a cycle, or for some people it might be a jog. It's definitely not a jog for me. I'm definitely working a lot harder when I'm jogging. But for some people who are very fit, a jog would be at aerobic capacity as well. And then you've also got resistance training, which will maintain cognitive health as well. So anyone that's listening is staying physically active and cognitively active throughout life. And, you see it in older individuals all the time. When they quote unquote give up on life or they have no more purpose, you start to see a heavy decline. And it's because the brain starts to degenerate, and other things as well. But one of the factors is this brain degeneration.
Really interesting, this thing. And also, I have read a lot about how important it is to have like a real network, real people around you, very close to you, in order to keep your brain healthy. Not just no, is that right? Because at least what I have read is that it is so. In fact, it is as bad as smoking or drinking to feel alone, to feel lonely, is as bad as other bad habits. So it's also important. This is also important for our brain health, right?
Yes, so loneliness can have a huge contributing factor to our brain health. And I love getting into the mechanisms of it, but we've seen it in rat studies. When we isolate rats, they increase a peptide called tachykinin. So tachykinin is a peptide that essentially creates aggression and bitterness in the brain, and it makes people depressed. But the interesting thing about human studies when we're looking at loneliness is that we can spend up to around 75% of our time alone. So, and it's also about the quality of the connections. So for anyone that hasn't maybe got a lot of people around them, I don't want them to fret, because you can have one really good connection and still feel connected with life. Now, there's another layer to this. There's a woman called Dr. Emma Sipala. She does research at Stanford, I believe. I need to double check that. She's incredible. She studies loneliness. And she basically concluded that the connection can actually come from oneself and nature. So you don't necessarily need to have other humans around you. And it depends on who you are as a person. You may connect deeper with humans. I have 2 dogs and 2 goats. I live on a farm. And so, I have no issue being alone the majority of the time because I have my animals. I probably couldn't do it in complete solitude, if I'm completely honest. But yeah.
You have in the book, you have a sentence that I really love, which is neurons that fire together, wire together. We are going to talk about habits now, but I wanted to ask you, how does this principle influence the way we form both positive and negative habits? This idea of the neurons all together, creating bad habits or good habits.
Yes. So with long-term potentiation, which is what I talk about in the book, which is this concept of neurons that fire together, wire together, is that through association and repetition, your brain can create new connections. So you want to have something that is well-timed together. I think it makes more sense if I explain it in the concept of breaking a habit.
Mm-hmm.
So the way that I explain it is you've got this long-term potentiation. So, neurons that fire together, wire together. And then you've got neurons that fail to sync, fail to link. So what that means is that, let's say you are somebody that gets easily triggered by something. Maybe you are working on your computer, your husband walks in, he asks a question, and you snap at him, you go, what? Or you get easily triggered by something else. If you decide to add a little pause between that trigger and the response, you actually separate the way that those neurons fire automatically.
Mm-hmm.
So over time, you can begin to put a conscious decision in that space to divert into something new. It might not happen the first time, but the more you pay attention to it, the more you start to create the space between the trigger and the response. And there you can change your course of action. Now, similarly, with creating a habit, it's the same thing. So you want to put together things that will fire in sequence so that you have a cue, a trigger, and a response, so that you can start to merge these synapses together and create a new pathway to create a new habit.
And regarding negative habits or negative patterns, why is it so easy to get stuck in these negative habits and so difficult to break them? And I'm thinking about I'm sure you have read the James Clear book, The Atomic Habits, and he talks about this, but from a scientific point of view, why it is so easy to get stuck and attached to a bad habit and so difficult to break it?
Yes. So the problem with bad habits is that they normally have a type of dopaminergic reward that is easy. So social media, smoking, etc. They all give you that hit, which reinforces the pattern. Now, the problem is that behaviorally, we don't learn very well from negative information. So what that means is, how many times have you berated yourself for something, like eating the cookie or drinking the alcohol or going to the party, and then how many times did it actually change the behavior? Never, right? Exactly. Exactly. So berating ourselves doesn't change the behavior, but that is the obvious choice of what we decide to do as humans, because we essentially learn that we can just take control of the situation by berating ourselves later. So subconsciously we say, it doesn't matter if I do this because I can just beat myself up about it later, and that's my sense of control. But it doesn't impose change because it doesn't release dopamine to talk negatively to yourself. So what is better suited is to positively reinforce yourself. So let's say you smoke a pack of cigarettes a day and you cut down to 2 cigarettes a day. What your brain will do is it will most likely pay attention to the fact that you're still smoking and you'll still keep berating yourself. Whereas instead, what I would say is you're smoking 18 cigarettes less per day. So slowly reinforcing positive wins and congratulating yourselves along the way will mean that you have a better chance at breaking these bad habits long term.
Yeah, the power of thoughts and the power of words is incredible. Absolutely incredible. And that's something you yes. say also in the book. And on the other side, on the positive habit side, does it really take 21 days, 66 days? Because we have like so many theories about how long does it take. I think that it depends on each of us, but I don't know if there is a scientific theory about how long does it take to create a new habit, good one.
Yeah. The pool of habits studies are it's a very complicated, part of the literature, but they did an annual review, which is one of the biggest journals in science, and it's well-reviewed, it's a peer-reviewed journal where they synthesize a bunch of different studies. And what they essentially concluded in this annual review is that it takes between 18 to 254 days.
Oh.
What that means, what that means is that it is really down to the individual. It depends on factors like, are you trying to break an old habit before adopting this new habit? So maybe you are trying to become a runner, but you're also a smoker. So it's going to take longer because you need to stop smoking and begin running. And it also depends on the amount of frequency you put in and intensity. So the way that we make changes in the brain is through repetition. So you could go on a 1 week long intensive and learn something very quickly, or you have a full-time job and you can only allocate 30 minutes to it every day, and it would take you a lot longer. Neither is better or worse, but what the key component to any change is consistency. And what that means is that sometimes people think, well, I haven't got time to do it, so I'm just not going to do it at all. Whereas the mind frame of saying, well, I only have 5 to 10 minutes, so I will just do 5 to 10 minutes is better than nothing. So sometimes I play guitar and I only play 5 minutes, but at least I'm in that habit of picking it up and using it.
So it is not about intensity, or not only about intensity, but it's more about consistency, as you said, repetition.
Yes.
And also three other things I've seen on a post on social media that you posted some weeks ago, talking about awareness, attention, and presence. And you said awareness, not force. Can you explain this idea? Because I think it's wonderful. It's really beautiful.
Yes. So, as humans, as adult humans, we have to pay attention to the things we want to change. Otherwise, our brain is going to succumb to that automaticity. It's not going to remind you how to make coffee, how to brush your teeth. Those things are all things that are part of the background so that you can use your brain for better things. And so it is with the habits you have ingrained. It's not going to ask you to change things unless you say, this is important and we need to pay attention to it. So that awareness is really important because that's the way that we make changes as adults. As children, it's different. We pretty much absorb everything. So it's about having that attention and awareness around what it is you want to change and consistently reminding yourself every single day. Because as I said, by Friday, you may forget that you even wanted to start a habit. Then you've got intention. So intention is the presence of making that change every single day. So it's more like it creates a spotlight of attention on the thing that you want to change. So you've got this attention, intention. And what did you say as well? Because I think I used something different.
Presence, not pressure. The third item, presence, not pressure.
Was that my post?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
You wrote it. Yeah. I think it's really beautiful because it's like treating ourselves with compassion. That is something that we do not normally do, and I think it's beautiful just because it's a compassive approach to how to create good habits, not just discipline and being rigidity, but being like compassive. Does it exist in English? Compassive?
Compassionate. Yes. Do you know why? It's because we need that relationship with ourselves. And when we're negative to ourselves and we're rigid with ourselves, it means that we don't trust ourselves. Whereas when we speak to ourselves in the present, compassionate way, compassive, I like that actually. But when we speak to ourselves in a compassionate way, we're saying, I trust that you can do this, and we can get it done in a way that is not so rigid and regimented and negative on ourselves. Because we're creating that relationship with ourselves, which then comes back full circle with that topic about connection. When you have a connection with yourself, then you can go forth with changing these habits with open eyes. When I think about changing a habit, I don't think, can I do it? I just think, how am I going to do it? How am I going to be patient with myself so that I can get to the point where this is something that I enjoy doing? Because there are habits that I want to break as well sometimes, And I think that that's a really important part of human psyche, the human psychology, human behavior, positive behavioral change. And I talk about it in Rewire. It's that self-trust element. And you do that by keeping those promises to yourself. I said I was going to go for a run today after this call. Not this one. I've got a couple other calls. I'm going to go for a run. I'm not negotiating with myself about whether I'm going to run because I said I was going to run. So I'm going to do it because I promised myself.
And Nicole, what can we do when we are in the what you call the creeping normality, which is like this new normality in which we believe those things that are part of our reality, those bad habits, and the issue is that we do not see them as bad habits, but as our reality and our normality. What can we do to be aware of that and get out of that situation?
Yeah. So I have the activity in there, and I don't know if you did it, the coming back to yourself and realizing that you are the person that you always describe to have the best values.
Yes, but the problem is I do not have passion. I'm not a passion person. So if it is not something that is like very obvious or very easy for me, I just skip and follow reading. That's an issue I have to work with myself. Yeah, I know.
Yeah. That's okay. So we're all working on something, but that creeping normality, it's a tricky one because that happens, for example, very commonly in relationships. You end up accepting parts of something that maybe you're not so happy with, but over time it becomes your new normal because it's your way of coping. And so the best way to describe it is like when you then leave a relationship, you have the opportunity to reassess where your true compass, where your true north is, because maybe you changed for somebody else. And that's part of relationships. And I think that that's completely normal. But coming back to what your values are, what it is that you want for yourself, how you see, sorry, I'm just going to do that because I can feel my hair. Coming back to yourself and realigning with your true values can help you reassess whether you've started to accept things that maybe were not within the realms of the boundaries that you've created.
Mm-hmm. We have talked about the power of thoughts, the power of words, and you also talk in the book about the power of visualization. And you say it has a key role in rewiring our brain. Why is it such a useful tool for our brains to visualize things? Because that's not reality, but for our brain, it is like really happening, right?
Yes. So I'll pull it back a little bit. Mm-hmm. There was an amazing study that was done in 1995 where they essentially took two groups of people. They asked one group to play a 5-finger piece on the piano. They'd never played the piano before. And the second group to simply imagine that they were playing that 5-finger piece on the piano. And what they saw was that both groups had similar levels of plasticity in the brain. And what that means is that through thought alone, we can start to create a blueprint for where our synapses could go. And I'm saying could because you can't simply imagine change forever. You have to pair it with action. So if you're trying to make a change, let's say, I like using the running example. Let's say you want to become a runner. You want to run in the morning, but you're used to snoozing your alarm. What you can do the night before is visualizing yourself waking up in the morning, not pressing snooze, putting on your clothes, putting on your shoes, putting on your, and going for that run. The caveat is that you have to pair it with action. So it means that you have to do it in the morning because then you're merging those two. But you've created essentially a blueprint for where your brain could go. And it's a very powerful tool. We've seen it, in the literature with sportsmen. I say sportsmen and women. We see that it changes the functional connectivity in the brain to help us enact a particular motor activity in a better way by visualizing. Mm-hmm. So the power of our thoughts are extremely important. The way that we speak to ourselves, the way that we see the world, the mindset we have. And, I've gone into numerous studies in the book on these studies that prove that the way that we approach particular things can have an impact on how we then get the outcome, essentially. And so, I'm going through a big change in my life at the moment, and I am going back to these tools where I'm visualizing myself being calm under pressure, launching a particular project that I'm looking to launch, and visualizing myself doing it with confidence, with the ability to put myself out there. One of my biggest fears, I guess, is, I don't know if that's the right word, but it's the fear of being seen. Mm-hmm. I am very, even though I have such a big presence, I actually am I'm very private. I live a very simple life on a farm with my dogs. So my life is very calm, and I keep a very private life. So I turmoil between these two sort of parts of me where I have to be online, but I also don't want to. And so I visualize myself being more open to the idea of being seen by the public and launching projects without the fear of judgment and all that. And so that's just a little bit of an insight into my life in case it helps anyone to see that, I'm a human that goes through these things as well. And I use these tools myself.
That's one of the many good things that you can find one can find in your book, which is like the personal point of view that you put everywhere. Because sometimes when you listen or read a scientist, you say, yeah, that's the numbers, that's like the figures, but that's not real life. And in the case of your book, it is real life, your real life. So yeah.
Thank you.
And Nicole, could we say that this visualization tool is like the antidote of the self-sabotage we almost everyone does to himself or herself all the time?
Yes. I love that you said that, because yes, what visualization does is it helps merge that gap between where you want to be. Because self-sabotage is that gap. You want to be somewhere, but maybe you don't believe that you can, or you're afraid of getting there, or you don't know how to get there. So you self-sabotage to keep yourself safe. Self-sabotage is a safety mechanism to keep you in the place that you're at, because the discomfort of the unknown can feel worse than the comfort of the known, even if the comfort of the known is a living hell right now. Again, the brain doesn't know the difference between right and wrong. It just knows what has been repeated. You see this very commonly in people who are in toxic in toxic relationships. It's not that they don't want to leave. It's that the safety, even though the safety hurts so much, is less painful than the discomfort of what's on the other side of that.
Yeah, well,
and familiarity is what we know best.
Yeah, well, you said it. Our brain is very primitive for some things, and in this case, the main goal or the first goal of our brain is survival. So, as you said, if sometimes we are afraid of going out of the box or going out of our comfort zone, even though that comfort zone is hell, because we are afraid of what's going to happen outside. And that's like one of you know this better than me, this primitive version or vision of our brain. I don't know how to say it in English, sorry.
Yes. Exactly. So this primitive part of the brain is concerned with survival. It wants to keep you safe, and we have this kind of higher cortical layer type thinking that can push us into new realms and new spaces. But it's learning to work with the two together, because they're not enemies. They don't work in tandem. We need to find ways to allow them to work together. And I haven't spoken about this in Rewire, actually, but it's one of the concepts that I'm talking about a lot lately, is creating this bridge between the two, the emotional connection between the limbic system, which is your emotional survival brain, and your frontal cortex. And when we acquire emotional intelligence, emotional awareness, what we do is that we actually strengthen the communication between these two parts of the brain, so that when you do feel a particular way, so I went through some stuff last year, and I went through it was a really dark place, but I knew how to get out of it. So I didn't push it away, because sometimes we have to go there. But with the right tools and the right awareness and the right connections, you can pull yourself out of there more effectively, so that every time you go to that place, you're like, okay, well, this is just part of life. I will get out of it. And it's creating the ability to know that you can prosper later down the line. So I knew in that moment that this wasn't going to be my reality forever. It's just a temporary blip in my life that is part of living.
We have talked about the importance of physical activity and physical health in order to keep our mental and brain health. But in this podcast, Nicole, I talk about sleep a lot, because for me, it's like the basis of health. So I would like you please to talk about the importance of sleep quality for our brain health, and how it is And how can we supercharge sleep? There's something they say in the book, supercharge sleep.
Yes, supercharge. Yes. So sleep is the fundamental, basis of health. And essentially, we've looked at many studies where we put on individuals, we sleep deprive them, and the outcomes are drastic. They're quite scary, actually, what it does to our body. It increases inflammation, it impacts our immune system, and essentially disrupts the cellular function of every single cell in your body. So that you become less effective at creating energy, you become less effective at thinking correctly. And it's the reason why when you're sleep deprived, you start to make mistakes. You start to be irritable. Your stress tolerance goes down. So you become more triggered. And it's because the cells are not working at their optimum down to the most basic fundamental level. And so sleep is vitally important, not just the length of sleep, but the quality of the sleep. How deep are you sleeping? And you can affect that by, social media use, phone use, artificial light. We live in an unprecedented time where we have a lot of screens. And again, I'm trying to instill this kind of positive attitude towards being more mindful around these things, because one of the things that happens is that your eyes communicate with your brain about whether it's daytime or nighttime outside. So if you have artificial light because you're looking at a screen, you've got big lights on, you've got your phone, you're scrolling in bed, your eyes are communicating that light is still coming in. Therefore, it should still be light outside. It's not time for sleep. So your body stops creating melatonin at the right time. It disrupts the way that it puts you into a deep sleep through brain frequencies. And all of this becomes disrupted. The problem is that when we sleep, we also create dopamine. If we're not sleeping correctly, we're not creating the correct amount of dopamine. When we wake up, we don't have the motivation to do the things we want to do. And it becomes a cycle where you then end up relying on your phone more. And then you just end up perpetuating this really dangerous cycle of damaging your sleep. Mm-hmm. So one of the best tools to try and sleep better is to aim to put your phone away much earlier in the night, 7, 8 o'clock if you can, especially if you're going to bed at sort of 9, 10, even 11.
This is Spain, Nicole. I'm afraid that's it's music to my ears. But talking about going to bed at 9 in Spain we are thinking about what are we going to have for dinner. Thinking about dinner at 9. So it's something we have to improve for sure.
Yes. Yeah, but you're living your best lives in Spain. I love Spain.
Yeah, we have other things. Countries. Yeah, right. Yes. Yeah, you have mentioned stress, and stress is something you talk a lot about in the book. But I would like you please to differentiate between the adaptive or good. Is not the best way to describe it, but the adaptive and non-adaptive stress, because we talk about stress in general as something which is bad, but we said before that we need to survive, and stress helps us to survive. So,
yes. And stress helps you to function. We're probably in a slight state of stress right now because you need that activity to think. If I didn't have this sort of stress circulating through my body, I wouldn't be thinking correctly. I'd be having a much more relaxed conversation with you about my day yesterday and what I ate. But I need stress to think. You need stress to run. You need stress to exercise and to do all the fun things. And what that means is that you've got this adaptive stress, which is good for you. You need it for specific things. And then you've got negative stress, which starts to impact your life negatively. And that generally comes in the form of chronic stress or the way that you approach stress as well. So one of the best things so let's say you're at work. Stress is stress to the body. So stress for running is the same as the stress from your boss. It's just how we perceive it and how we regulate from it. So, let's say you're at work and you get triggered by somebody at work, or you go into a meeting and you didn't get the outcome that you were expecting, or your boss gave you some bad news, or maybe even shouted at you. One of the best tools to regulate from that stress, that you're telling your brain and body that you are not in a state of survival and you're not trying to be killed by a lion, is to regulate. So you can do a breathing exercise like the physiological sigh. So double inhale through the nose, so like this, And then long exhale through the mouth. Let's do 2 like that together.
Let's do it.
One more. Nice. How good do you feel?
I mean, I feel right, but I'm stressed, Nicole, because I'm talking not in English. I'm interviewing like a mogul of social media right now. I'm paying attention of the recording machine. So now I need stress.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So we won't do this with you.
No, I'm going to do it right. We finished. After we finish, I'm going to do that. But
yes,
that was. Yeah, go on, please.
Yeah, I was going to say, because that's it. You're teaching your brain and body that you can regulate from it so that you don't linger in a state of stress. The problem is you get this trigger stacking. So you come off a podcast, then somebody cuts you off in traffic, then something else happens, and then it becomes an accumulative effect where you then end up blowing up. So if you can learn to regulate between each cycle, you become more adaptable and malleable to handling stress. Because your brain is not saying to you, you're in a fight or flight mode.
I was precisely going to ask you about meditation and breath work, but I understand that's something. Well, we have practiced our physiological side, so I can understand it's a tool you normally use to calm down. For me, in my case, I also have dogs, so for me, my way to de-stress is right after we finish. Close the computer, and I live in the countryside also, so I get out with my dogs, have a long walk in nature, and that's the way I balance my stress level, because otherwise, I'm all the time working with the computer, social media, and it's very easy for me to get lost in this chronic stress. So.
Exactly. So you're doing a wonderful thing by doing that, because you're regulating from that stress. So you become more adaptable and ready to deal with more stress.
Mm-hmm. And well, Nicole, we are getting to the last question of this interview, and I would like you to give us a piece of advice for our listeners. Maybe they are thinking about, okay, very nice, this girl, very nice, Nicole, very nice what she's saying, but I don't know really how to rewire, or I don't know where to start. So if you could give us just one tip, the first thing we could do in order to start rewiring our brain and changing those bad habits or negative patterns into positive ones, what would be that tip?
Yeah, I think tip number 1 is definitely paying attention to what it is that needs to change, and then inviting some compassionate thinking in there. Instead of berating, going, oh, you're still doing all these bad habits, reframe that into something that says, you know what, I've just listened to this podcast. I'm now empowered to make the change, because we have the tools, I have the knowledge, and I have a good relationship with myself to be able to move forth into something that's going to be long lasting and positive. Because we know that negative speaking, that negative conversation with ourselves doesn't instill any change. So I think that would be my biggest tip. And then, all the steps are in the book. I break it down from step 1 to 7 in the phase 2 of the book, which is a step-by-step process on how to begin rewiring your brain. And one of the biggest things is to remove the excess in your life that no longer serves you, whether it be social media. Unfollow those people that make you feel rubbish about yourself. Stop reading things that annoy you. Cut out, and I'm not into cancel culture. I don't think you need to cut out people that are negative in your life, but maybe limit those people from being able to affect you, whether it be through communicating with them, creating boundaries, or not allowing them to change your mood. Mm-hmm. And that requires a lot of patience, I understand, because the subconscious programming that we get from our consumption has a huge impact on our life.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much, Nicole. Such a pleasure to have you in the podcast. Such a wonderful book. I told you before, it's amazing because neuroscience is not something easy to explain, and it is really easy explained in the book. So thank you for that, because for people like me, we're not who are not expert, I'm not an expert on neuroscience. It has been really easy and easy to read, but full of content. And that's something that is not easy to find in a book. So congrats for that.
Thank you. I really, really appreciate that. I have a question. Did you read it in English or in Spanish?
I've read it in Spanish first because I didn't know it was possible to interview you. But in the moment I had the opportunity to interview you, I asked for it in English because in order to prepare the interview, I have like my notes here. I have it here.
Yeah.
My notes in the Spanish edition. And then I just look for the things, the concept in the English edition so that I could prepare the interview. So I have like both
Amazing.
editions.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much. It's a huge honor.
Thanks
so much.
Thanks to you, and good luck with the book. I hope you write new books in the future, because this is like neuroscience is like the future of health. Everybody's looking at the brain and trying to discover every single corner of the brain. So, I'll read them for sure. Thank you so much, Nicole.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Take care.
Espero que hayas disfrutado del episodio. Este programa de podcast es independiente y en abierto gracias al apoyo económico de marcas que apuestan por mi trabajo y confían en mí para ayudarles a comunicar su mensaje. Los expertos que aceptan mi invitación a intervenir en este programa no tienen ningún tipo de vinculación con dichas marcas a menos que se especifique lo contrario. Y todo el contenido de mi podcast, página web y redes sociales que haya sido patrocinado irá acreditado como tal. Gracias por ayudarme a que este proyecto siga siendo viable e independiente visitando la web de mis anunciantes, dejando reseñas, comentarios y valoraciones en las distintas plataformas de reproducción y compartiendo mi contenido en tus redes sociales. Mil gracias por estar al otro lado. Nos escuchamos en el próximo episodio.